What's up everyone? Today I'm going to show you how to tune the carburetor in a Chinese scooter. This one is a GMW. That's like BMW except for worse. It's a 150cc engine. This is going to be very similar to pretty much all the Chinese scooters out there. The 50cc's are going to be very similar to the 150. A slight difference in the carburetor, but for the most part tuning it will be the same. You only need a few tools. Flathead screwdriver, Phillips screwdriver, 12mm wrench, and 10mm socket with a ratchet. Remove the seat compartment. Unscrew the intake manifold. Remove vacuum lines. Take loose the throttle cable. Disconnect the idle enricher. Unscrew the air filter. Pull the carburetor up. Take loose the fuel line. And it's out. Drain the gas from the carburetor. There are a few different parts on the exterior of this carburetor. First we have some vacuum hoses. This goes up to the fuel inlet valve. When there's vacuum coming from the engine, it allows fuel to flow in the carburetor. If the engine is not running, the valve is closed. The other end of this vacuum hose goes into this little thing here. When the engine is under load, it moves the needle up and allows more fuel into the engine. Over here, we have the electronic auto enricher. This is for when you first start up the engine. It makes the mixture a little bit more rich. And in here, we have the idle mixture screw. This adjusts the air to fuel ratio of the carburetor only when it's on idle. This is our fuel inlet. And this is our fuel drain. Typically this will have a hose and a valve for convenient draining somewhere else on the moped. I found that it's quite a bit more convenient if you just put a cap on it. Over on this side we have a throttle, and then the idle speed adjustment screw. This simply props the throttle partway open. Let's go ahead and take off the float bowl. Here we have the float assembly. If you pull this pin out, you can take the floats off. And attached to the floats we have a fuel inlet valve. This little valve, when the floats move up and down, cuts off the flow of fuel into the carburetor. This is our main jet. Right now I'm at sort of a high elevation here, 4,500 feet, so I have the number 102 installed. There are a lot of different sizes, stock. Sometimes you can get them in 105. There's a whole wide variety of sizes. The smallest available for this carburetor for the 150cc is 100. And there are a lot of different ones you can get here. These all look the same, but the hole on the inside is just slightly different size, and they'll have different numbers. Here we have the pilot jet. This one is a number 34. They also have them in 35. You can get a 38. There's also a 32. Now how this works, on idle you have this idle mixture screw, and that controls the air to fuel ratio only when the engine is idling. So on idle you have this idle mixture screw. You actually want this to be screwed most of the way in. Tighten it all the way down and then back it up about one turn, not much more than that. Then when you're just off idle, the pilot or slow jet does your air to fuel metering. and then mid to full throttle, your main jet does that. But there's more to it than that. Let's flip the carburetor over. On this side, you pull this, we get a spring, and there's a diaphragm here, and there's this big air piston. Now if you take a look here, that opens and closes there, and that's operated by a vacuum. When there's more engine load, this will move up, and there's also a rod that goes in there. So this needle goes into a hole, and on the other end meets up with this jet. So when you're on idle and when you're in the first part of the throttle, this part's all the way down, and this needle is pretty much blocking the flow of fuel to the main jet. As you accelerate and get up into the higher RPMs, this moves up and allows fuel to flow through that main jet. So that'll move up and down. And there's a couple adjustments here. You can just pull this piece out here. There's a little spring in there. And out comes the needle. Now this needle here just has a flat top on it. There's another style also. Some carburetors will come with a needle that has a little C-clip on top. And you can space this needle with little 0.5 millimeter spacers. And what this does is if you place a spacer here, when it sits in there, it spaces the needle farther away from the main jet, which makes it more rich. Now this essentially, when it's all the way open, you're basically flowing unrestricted through this jet anyway. So by placing a spacer, what you're doing is changing the RPMs at which fuel starts to flow through this main jet. A few different adjustments you can make. So you've got idle mixture right here. This is only while it's idling. Then you've got your pilot or slow jet, which is for the lower RPM range. And then you've got the main jet and the needle, which work together. Now, because there are only certain sizes, you have to make certain compromises and adjustments. Say, for example, you put this 34 pilot jet in there, and it's just a little bit too rich. Well, what do? There isn't a 33. And say you put a 32 in there, and then it's too lean. So what do? Well, you can actually shift the way these jets work a little bit. If you have one that's a little bit too rich, you can tighten up this idle jet. It'll give it a little bit less fuel on the idle side, and over here you can move this little guy a little bit closer into that main jet and just kind of cut that fuel off a little bit as well when you're in that range. And then when you get back over to the higher RPMs, the vacuum will pull this piston up and it'll open that up, and then you just pick the appropriate jet there. So these little spacers, these little 0.5 millimeter spacers will change that. So say for example this jet was too lean and we want to give it just a little bit more gas. Well, we can give it a little more gas on this idle side, and then on this side we put a spacer in here. We move this guy a little bit farther away from this main jet, and now we're letting just a little bit more fuel in through this side. Now here's a little tip. When the throttle is closed, the carburetor is sucking fuel through this idle mixture screw. So you want to make this as lean as possible when you do your idle adjustment. Alright, let's go ahead and put this back together. For starters, turn that idle screw all the way in. Back at about a turn and a half to 2 turns there. Put in that pilot jet. Put that main jet in there. I'm using a 102 here. Fuel inlet valve. There we go. Flip it over. Disassemble this. Go ahead and drop that needle in there. I'm not using any spacers here. Now there's a little rubber O-ring in here, and sometimes that O-ring will give you problems going in. Don't force it. Just just throw a drop of lube on there. There we go, that should just snap into place. Get our spring in there. Okay, and we're ready to test it out. When you put the carburetor back in, there is an adjustment for the throttle. You want to make the throttle cable as tight as you can, but not too tight. If you do it properly, when you let go of the throttle, it should still snap and hit that idle adjustment screw. Once you've installed the carburetor, it won't start right away. We have to fill that fuel bowl first. This is going to take a few tries. Looks like we need to make an idle adjustment. With this scooter, I found a long flathead screwdriver works really well. And I can place it right in here and adjust that idle mixture screw. I'm going to turn it counterclockwise just a little bit here. You should wait till the engine warms up to do this adjustment. And basically you want to make the idle mixture screw as lean as possible. Use a combination of the mixture screw and the idle speed screw to obtain a stable idle speed. And try not to make this idle mixture rich. If you do that, on deceleration you will get the backfire through the muffler. So avoid going very rich with that idle. Now here's the tricky part. How do you know if you picked the right jets? Well, I cheated. I installed an oxygen sensor and a gauge. Which tells me precisely the air-to-fuel ratio that's going through the engine. If you don't have one of these, you can listen to the way the engine sounds and judge the performance of the scooter to determine your air-to-fuel ratio. Bogging down on acceleration, kind of a hollow sound, can be a lean mixture. A rich mixture, if it's extremely rich, can also bog the engine down, but typically gives you better acceleration. Alright, so there you have it. Keep track of as much data as you can. Think about acceleration, deceleration, what happens, whether or not you get misfires, if you get backfire through the muffler. Keep track of performance, hesitation, things like that. It's a bit of a trial and error process, but you will know if you have it tuned right, if it's going to perform well. Also keep track of your gas mileage. Using this tuning method, I achieved 86 miles per gallon on my 150cc scooter, which is rated at 75 miles per gallon. So I think I did well. Use these tips, and good luck.